Most people knew G.D. Vance as a best-selling author, a U.S. senator, or a political powerhouse. But before all of that, before the success, before the fame, he was just a kid trying to survive. That's why, on a bitter cold evening in Columbus, when an 11-year-old boy named Tad Mitchell crashed into him at a political rally, it wasn't just another moment in his busy schedule. It was a reminder of the past he had fought so hard to escape. Tad wasn't supposed to be there. Political rallies weren't for kids like him, kids who didn't have a home, kids who counted empty bottles instead of dollars, kids who had learned the hard way that wishing for help never brought it. But tonight, Tad was desperate. His mother hadn't eaten in over a day. She was too sick to leave the car they had been living in, too weak to do anything but whisper reassurances that things would get better. But Tad wasn't naive. If he didn't find food tonight, there was no telling how much worse things would get. So he had come downtown, blending into the massive crowd of people gathering for a G.D. Vance campaign event. He didn't care about speeches or politics. He had his eyes locked on something else, the long folding tables stacked with bottled water and food. If he timed it right, if he was fast enough, maybe he could grab a sandwich when no one was looking. Maybe tonight, his mom wouldn't have to pretend she wasn't hungry. But just as he was about to move, he ran straight into someone. Hard. The force sent him stumbling backward, his plastic bag of 27 empty bottles slipping from his grip. They hit the pavement, rolling in every direction. Panic surged through him. He had spent hours collecting those. He needed 30 to get just $1.5 for food. "Whoa there, buddy," a voice said, calm and steady. Tad froze. The man standing in front of him wasn't just anyone. It was G.D. Vance himself. Tad's breath caught in his throat. He had just crashed into one of the most powerful men in the country. Everything in him screamed to run. People like G.D. Vance didn't have time for kids like him. He expected the usual, a dismissive glance, maybe an annoyed remark about watching where he was going. But that's not what happened. Instead, G.D. bent down and started picking up the bottles. "You all right?" he asked, holding one up. His voice wasn't harsh, wasn't rushed. It was something else, something Tad wasn't used to. It was kind. Tad nodded quickly, kneeling down to scoop up the rest. I didn't mean to. These are for recycling, right?" G.D. asked, turning the bottle in his hand. 5 cents each. Tad hesitated before giving a small nod. G.D. studied the bottle for a moment before speaking again. "My grandmother used to collect bottles, too." His tone softened. "She always said it was honest work, even if some people looked down on it." Tad stopped. No one ever talked to him like this. No one ever acted like they understood. G.D. Vance wasn't supposed to care about a homeless kid digging through trash for recyclables. But there he was, on his knees in an expensive suit, helping pick up bottles like it was the most natural thing in the world. For the first time that night, Tad didn't feel invisible. "My name's G.D., he said, extending a hand. "And you?" Tad hesitated. People like G.D. weren't supposed to notice kids like him. They weren't supposed to care. But something about the way he spoke made him feel safe. "Tad," he said quietly, shaking his hand. G.D. nodded toward the long tables at the rally. "You know, there's a whole stack of sandwiches over there. More than they need. It'd be a shame for them to go to waste." Tad's stomach twisted at the mention of food. But nothing ever came without a price. "My mom," he blurted before he could stop himself. "She needs food more than me." Something in GDE's face changed. Not pity, not discomfort, just quiet understanding. "Where is she?" GD asked, his voice gentle. Tad knew better than to answer questions like that. His mother had drilled it into him. Don't tell strangers where we stay. Don't let anyone see the car. Don't let them separate us. But for some reason, with G.D. Vance standing there, he wanted to tell the truth. She's sick, Tad whispered. And we don't have anywhere else to go. G.D. went quiet. His jaw tightened slightly, like he was remembering something. Then, with complete certainty, he said, "Let's get some food first. Then we'll figure out how to fix this." Tad should have run. That's what he had always been told to do. But for the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. Hope. Tad hesitated for a moment, clutching the warm bag of food as G.D. Vance stood before him, waiting for an answer. The man in the expensive suit didn't look impatient or annoyed, just curious. But Tad had learned long ago that curiosity from strangers wasn't always a good thing. People who asked too many questions usually wanted something in return, and he had nothing left to give. G.D. knelt down, lowering himself to Tad's level. He didn't reach for him, didn't push, just met his eyes and asked again, softer this time. "Where is your mom, kid?" Tad swallowed hard, glancing around. The rally was still buzzing with energy, the crowd fixated on the stage where another speaker had just taken the microphone. If he ran now, G.D. might not follow. He might just give up. But something in the man's voice, something in the way he had talked about his grandmother collecting bottles, made Tad pause. He wanted to trust him. He just didn't know if he could afford to. She's back at our car," Tad finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's sick. She hasn't eaten in a while." G.D.'s expression didn't change, not pity, not surprise, just quiet understanding. "Let's go see her," G.D. said, standing up. "And we'll bring some more food with us." Tad stiffened. "I can't just take food like that." "We don't do charity," G.D. chuckled, shaking his head. "Good. I don't do charity either." He gestured to the food table behind him. "That's campaign food. It's already paid for. If it sits there, it'll go to waste. So, how about we just call this making sure good food doesn't get thrown out?" Tad hesitated for a moment longer before giving a small nod. "Okay, but only if you don't tell anyone where we are." G.D. didn't argue. He just started loading up a second bag. "Lead the way." The two of them walked through the streets of Columbus in silence, Tad gripping his bag like a lifeline. The cold February air bit at his face, but he barely noticed. His mind was racing. Was he making a mistake? What if this man wasn't who he seemed? But then he glanced up at G.D., watching as the man carefully carried the bag of food, his eyes scanning the streets with the kind of awareness Tad had only seen in people who'd been through something hard. They reached the abandoned Kmart parking lot, the old blue Honda tucked away behind a row of bushes. Tad stopped a few feet away and turned to G.D. "Stay here," he said. "I need to wake her up first." G.D. gave a small nod, taking a step back as Tad approached the car. He tapped lightly on the fogged-up window. "Mom?" "It's me, inside." The bundle of blankets shifted, and his mother's pale face appeared, eyes still heavy with exhaustion. "Tad," she rasped. "I brought food, Mom. And someone who wants to help." Marina Mitchell stiffened, years of survival instincts kicking in at once. Her gaze snapped past Tad to where G.D. was standing a few feet away, hands in his coat pockets, watching but not approaching. "Who is he?" she whispered, barely more than a breath. "He says his name is G.D., Tad explained quickly. "He gave me food." And he hesitated, then just said it. "He used to be like us." Marina's grip on the door handle tightened. Slowly, she forced herself to sit up. GD didn't move. He let her take him in, let her process the situation on her own time. Finally, after a long moment, she unlatched the door. "You've got 2 minutes," she said, her voice hoarse but firm. "Then you leave." GD stepped forward slowly, setting the bag of food on the hood of the car. "Fair enough," he said. "But first, you should eat something." Marina's hands shook as she picked through the bag, unwrapping a sandwich like it was made of gold. She took small, careful bites, as if savoring something she hadn't tasted in years. GD stood back, watching but saying nothing. After a few moments, Tad spoke up. "He says he used to be like us, Mom." Marina's eyes flicked up to GD. "That true?" GD leaned against the car, crossing his arms. "Depends on what you mean by like you." "I mean homeless," she said bluntly. GD exhaled. "Yeah, for a while. Not always, but enough to know what it's like. Enough to remember." Silence stretched between them. Marina finished her sandwich, staring down at her hands. Finally, she spoke. "And now?" GD smiled faintly. "Now I'm a U.S. Senator." Marina froze mid-bite. Tad nearly dropped his water bottle. "What?" Marina breathed. GD let out a small chuckle. "Didn't expect that one, huh?" Marina blinked rapidly, like she was trying to clear her head. "You're serious? You're GD Vance?" "The GD Vance?" GD nodded. "Yeah, I guess so." Tad looked between them, confused. "You know who he is, Mom?" Marina ran a shaky hand through her hair. "I read his book when it came out. Hillbilly Elegy. About growing up poor in Ohio. I used to tell myself, if he could make it, maybe I could too." She let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Guess I didn't quite make it." GD's expression softened. "Maybe not yet. But that doesn't mean you won't." Marina swallowed hard, her walls visibly cracking. But then her face hardened again. "Look, Senator, I appreciate the food. I do. But we don't need pity. And we definitely don't need a politician making promises he won't keep." GD didn't flinch. "I don't make promises I can't keep." He nodded toward Tad. "He said you used to be a nurse. That right?" Marina stiffened. "Yeah." Before she stopped herself, GD pressed forward. "Then let's start with something simple. No promises. Just a conversation." Marina hesitated, her fingers curling around the edge of the bag. "What kind of conversation?" GD met her gaze head-on. "The kind that might change everything." Marina sat still, her fingers tightening around the edge of the bag, her body tense with the weight of everything she had lost. Across from her, GD Vance remained patient, waiting, not pressing, not pushing, just waiting. There was something in his eyes, something steady, something that didn't feel like charity or pity. It felt like understanding. Finally, she exhaled, the breath shaky and uneven. "All right," she murmured. "We can talk." GD gave a slight nod, as if he had already known she'd say that. "Good. Then let's go somewhere warm." Marina hesitated, glancing at Tad. He had already finished his sandwich, but his wide, hopeful eyes told her everything. He wanted her to trust this man. And maybe, just maybe, so did she. "All right," she said again, softer this time. "Where are we going?" GD smiled. "There's a diner about 2 blocks from here. Quiet, warm, and they make a mean cup of coffee. My treat." Marina nearly laughed. "A senator is buying me coffee?" GD shrugged. "I've had worse investments." For the first time in months, Marina felt something other than exhaustion. She felt possibility. The bell above the diner door jingled as they stepped inside, the warmth wrapping around them like a blanket. The scent of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air. It was a simple place, red vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner, the kind of place that hadn't changed much in the last 30 years. A waitress with a name tag that read Ruby looked up from wiping the counter. She eyed Marina and Tad for a moment, taking in the worn clothes, the tired faces. But if she had any judgments, she kept them to herself. "Sit anywhere you like, hun," she said, tossing a menu onto the table. "Coffee?" GD glanced at Marina, waiting for her to answer. "Yes, please," Marina said, surprising herself. "And for him too," she nodded toward Tad. GD smiled. "Make his a hot chocolate," Tad grinned. They slid into a booth, GD taking the seat across from them. The tension hadn't fully left Marina's shoulders, but it was easing bit by bit. The warmth, the smell of food, the sound of normal life around her, it felt almost unreal. GD leaned forward, elbows on the table. "All right, let's get to it." Marina folded her arms. "To what?" GD met her gaze. "To figuring out how we get you out of this mess," she exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "It's not that simple, I know," GD said. "But simple isn't what I do. I do solutions." She wanted to argue, to say there were no solutions for people like her. But then, why was he here? Why was a U.S. senator sitting in a dingy diner with a homeless nurse and her kid? The waitress returned with their drinks, setting a steaming cup in front of Marina. "You want anything to eat?" she asked. Marina opened her mouth to decline, but GD spoke first. "Pancakes, eggs, and bring out extra. We're talking business, and business runs on breakfast," the waitress smirked. "You got it." Marina stared at GD. "I can't pay for this. I didn't ask you to," she frowned. "Why?" GD set his cup down. "Because I know exactly where you are. And I know what it feels like to wonder if you'll ever get out." Marina swallowed, her throat tight. And GD's voice softened. "And I did. But not alone." The words hit her harder than she expected. Not alone. She had spent so long believing it was just her and Tad against the world. That no one was coming. That no one cared. But here was this man, a senator, a man who had walked the halls of power, telling her that someone had once helped him too. "How?" she finally asked. GD smiled slightly. "Let's start with what you need." For the next hour, they talked. GD asked questions not in the prying, judgmental way social workers did, but in a way that made Marina feel like her answers actually mattered. He learned about her nursing career, her diagnosis, the disability application that had been denied twice. He asked about Tad's schooling, where they had been before losing their apartment, if there was family anywhere that could help. And then, for the first time in months, someone offered real solutions. "I have a friend," GD said, pulling out his phone. "She runs a medical advocacy group. They specialize in cases like yours, people who got pushed out of the system. She's going to call in a few minutes, and we're going to get that disability case moving again." Marina blinked. "Just like that?" GD nodded. "Just like that." Tad stared at him. "You can do that?" GD smirked. "Kid, senators can do a lot of things when they want to." Marina shook her head, still trying to process it all. But GD wasn't done. "Now about housing." He glanced up as the waitress placed their food on the table. "You need a stable place now." "No waiting, no shelters," Marina scoffed. "You make it sound easy." GD's expression darkened. "It's not. But there are apartments specifically set aside for medical cases like yours. People just don't know they exist." He took a sip of coffee. "But I do." Marina stared at him. And what? You'll just make a call and get us a place? GD shrugged. If it helps, yeah. She felt dizzy. Too much, too fast. She had spent months fighting to survive, and here this man was, making it sound like a phone call could fix everything. She shook her head. I don't understand. Why are you doing this? GD set down his fork. His voice was quieter now. Because someone did it for me. Marina's breath caught in her throat. GD continued. When I was a kid, we moved around a lot. My mom struggled with addiction. Some days we had food. Some days we didn't. He exhaled slowly. And then one day, someone stepped in. They didn't have to, but they did. And it changed everything. He leaned forward. So now I do the same. Because I know what happens when no one does. Silence stretched between them. Marina's hands trembled as she picked up her fork. She took a bite. Then another. And just like that, she let herself believe, for the first time in months, that maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. Tad adjusted his backpack, looking up at the front door of their new apartment. A real place, with real walls. No more parking lots, no more hiding. Marina stepped outside, looking healthier, stronger. Her disability case had been approved, and with GD's help, she had started part-time nursing again. And as for GD, he was still there. He still checked in, still made sure they had what they needed. As Marina locked the door behind them, Tad smiled. Ready for school, kid? GD called from his car. Tad grinned. Yeah. You ready to be late for work, Senator? GD laughed. Never. As they drove off, Marina glanced out the window. And for the first time in years, she wasn't looking back. She was looking forward. How many people out there are like Marina and Tad, one bad break away from losing everything? How many need just one person to step in? What do you think? Should more leaders use their power to help the people who need it most? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe in stories like this, hit that subscribe button, because hope is contagious.